Chapter 4 Monsters. Francois slept in the bell tower of the Sainte Marguerite Church in Vermont with his cutlass in hand. He discovered the refuge by happenstance. Several hours after he and Renoir separated in the forest, when the rain ceased and the moon broke through, he found himself on the outskirts of the little burnt-out hamlet bordering the Somme River. The sole edifice left intact was the church, spared by a superstitious, stout-hearted German named Matthias Nilsson, whose strict Lutheran upbringing had him fearing his God more than he would ever fear his colonel. After all, they were abandoning this territory, so how would anyone ever know that he disobeyed orders and let the church survive? Risk the wrath of God by putting the torch to a holy sanctum? No thank you. Better to be safe than commit that level of blasphemy. It revealed itself to be a naive decision. When the colonel found out from his subordinates that the one building left in Vermont was the only building with an uncompromised view of the surrounding territory, including an unimpeded view of San Quentin and the Siegfried Line, he had the Lutheran boy, Matthias, whom he specifically tasked with burning it, brought out and executed before the entire brigade on the morning of Good Friday. After the pitiable event, he sent a second squad of soldiers to complete the demolition. Unfortunately for all concerned, before they finished Matthias's job, an altogether different demolition with far more vast consequences had occurred. The squad that set out to do the Lutheran boy's job camped in Vermans ruins on the evening of Good Friday, intending to blow the tower come morning. They were all brutalized and dead before dawn on Saturday. They rose up the next night and raged onward in pursuit of Renoir and Francois. Now Francois's pursuers were gone, and the town's remains were dead empty. Francois climbed to the top floor of the bell tower. He hauled the ladder up and shut the trap door beneath him, isolated, if not safe. He stood at the crenellated wall atop the tower and stared out into a nightscape lit in shades of grey, blue, black by the full moon. The rain was long gone. He saw clear to the horizon in all directions of the compass. The startling moonlight revealed no sign of hunters, but Francois felt nothing in the way of certainty that death was not following him, close on his heels. He sat back against the wall, resting his feet on the trap door. He set his cutlass across his knees and shut his eyes, just to let them rest a moment. But sleep grabbed hold of him with inky black tentacles and dragged him under before he could think to fend it off. When Francois opened his eyes, the heat in the subterranean cavern nearly overwhelmed him. He saw stars and had to rein in his breath as he took it all in. He looked down. Francois saw a hand that was not his own. It had almost the same dark brown cast as his, and yet it was alien. His sword arm was entirely shielded in leather, reinforced with armor plate, ending in a scalloped steel gauntlet. In the armored hand he saw a gladius sword, short and heavy, its blades sharpened with care to perfect cutting edges. A little boy brought him his helmet. He looked familiar to Francois. He knelt and allowed the child to place the helm on his head. All humanity vanished beneath the steel brim and face mask. Francois's breath echoed in his ears. The scent of his body, his sweat and adrenaline, his foul breath saturated his nose with their stench. The boy cinched the leather chin strap tight and stood back, admiring his handiwork. Francois tested the fit and nodded. The little boy stepped aside as Francois stood. Up the slope of a tight hallway, a door swung open on freshly oiled hinges, sending scatterings of light from the arena down into the pit. Francois began his walk up the passageway. He heard the cries and cheers from the arena. He broke into a jog toward the light. As he cleared the threshold, the light and heat from Sol Invictus, the unconquered and unconquerable sun god, racing his quadriga chariot through the sky, blazed through the screened eye holes of Francois's helmet. The cheers crescendoed. Francois awoke. He could still taste the Colosseum's thick air, but the heat had vanished. Biting cold pressed through his wool battle fatigues like sharp nails tapped in all the way to his bones. His body shivered. Francois sat up and pulled the trench coat tightly around him. What had awoken him? He listened intently. A gentle whisper of icy wind. Other than that, nothing. He began to stand. Then he heard it. Beneath him in the church, the scrape of boots on stone steps. Francois's breath caught. The tremors in his body were not from the sharp stab of the cold air. Mastering fear was something he accomplished long before he approached manhood. He had done things in his life that took more courage in one outing than most men would need to employ in their entire lives. Yet the feeling rushing through him now, shaking his spine and vibrating out to his extremities, was beyond his control. It was all he could do not to drop his cutlass, clattering it to the floor, revealing himself to whatever was hunting him from below. Francois heard the footsteps climbing up the wide, circular stairway of the tower, approaching the final landing directly below the trapdoor. He quieted his breath and held the saber against his chest. The footsteps halted on the dead end of the landing beneath him. For long, quiet moments there was no sound. Then a voice spoke to him in French. "Francois, are you there? It is Adam." Francois's shivering seemed to stop, but it felt more as though it accelerated so much that his entire body was humming at such a high vibrational frequency that it appeared to reach stillness. He knew the man below, although the voice was different. He knew it was Adam. And he knew Adam was as dead can be. Finbar Kelly lay buried in the muddy flow below the riverbank and listened to the troop of monsters moving past above him. He kept his breath silent and shallow, so shallow that he felt his heart pound angst-ridden over the tiny flow of oxygen it was receiving, but he held on tightly. Finn would not end up like his fellow Irish Fusiliers. He swore to Christ he would rather drown himself than end his days as they had. The monster men who captured them seemed to take great joy in one-upping each other, as they took the men of Finbar's company apart one by one. The 134 of them had all been captured in the trenches in the early morning hours on Saturday, surprised from behind. They surrendered to the demons without a fight. The lot of them might have died better had they fought back. The small trifle of men that lived until dawn were hog-tied and left lying amongst their recently dead fellows at the bottom of the trench until night fell. As the sun disappeared, all the surrounding corpses, including their recently departed companions, rose up, cut them loose from their bonds, and started in on them with gusto. Finbar recognized that the dead men were speaking Latin as they worked, mother tongue of Holy Rome. But their version was that of a Roman Empire from long before the holy part got tacked on. The Rome these men recalled had its own gods and goddesses, pilfered from the Greeks, along with the tortures they were now employing on the descendants of the long-dead Celtic warriors. They spent years hunting and killing for their man-god, Julius. The crucifixion began the night's dirty work, and though it was awful to witness, Finbar would not particularly miss the British officer, Captain Stafford, who'd shoved them along into the meat grinder of battle. 5 shrieking deaths later, young Terry McTavish was quartered alive with a dull axe to the slobbering cheers of the crowd. It was brutal, excruciating. The dullness of the blade stretched the experience longer in Finbar's mind than it possibly could have taken in real time. After Terry was gone, they prepared to burn Finn's friend, Will Trumbull, alive. Finn could take no more. Not counting Will, he was one of only 3 men remaining. He knew this stretch of land better than anyone else in his company. He scouted it for the regiment and found ways in and out over the past 8 weeks that they had occupied the sector. He used his knowledge of the territory to escape undetected and deliver arms and armament he forged from the field to Caitlin for delivery to the revolutionaries at home in Ireland. Finbar prayed he had not waited too long to use that knowledge. A grinning Roman in a Scots kilt, missing a quarter of his head and one eyeball, struck a lucifer match and dropped it onto Will Trumbull's chest. The petrol fumes went up with a whoosh, catching One Eye's shirt sleeve on fire. The mob laughed while Will Trumbull screamed, his skin blistering as it blackened. The one-eyed man batted at the flames on his arm, trying to staunch them, but the fumes leapt and the flames followed, and his kilt caught fire too, which made the laughter of his mates roar even louder. Finbar's opportunity lay right before him. All he needed was the courage to snatch it up. Finn rabbited, up the ladder and over the rear of the parapet. He bought himself 10 seconds by kicking the ladder back down into the trench before the nearest demon could chase. Then he was off. An arrow fired into the night. A missile sailing into darkness, it alone sure of its destination. Finbar covered 100 yards before the Romans piled out and began pursuing him. It took Finbar nearly an hour of steady jogging to reach the river, but he was certain of the way and never missed a step. When he got to the water, he could tell they were close. The mass of them calling out to each other echoed to him as they fanned out behind him. Finn reached the bank and slid over it into the cold, flowing murk. The course before him made him curse his Irish luck. If the rain had not ceased, he felt sure he could have made the swim across to safety under its curtain, but it stopped falling a quarter hour back, and now that goddamn full moon shone down into the Somme River, lighting it up in radiant silver and gold, showing off his escape path for the whole fucking world to see. Finn's terror nearly had him chance it. He was fit and a solid swimmer. He learned all the strokes from his brother Rory in the Royal Canal in Kildare. But the moment's pause he took before kicking off saved him. He heard the footsteps coming. He ducked under the surface and eased his way to the bank in the frigid darkness. When he blindly touched mud and algae, he surfaced silently and pressed himself into the muck and slime of the river's edge. He buried himself in the water up to his nose, summoned every prayer, made every promise he could to God and Jesus and whoever the bloody Holy Ghost was and any bloody fucking buddy else who was taking exchanges for divine blessings to deliver him from the evil that was a-hunting him. The supreme beings were welcome to take whatever they wanted in exchange for his life. But no rapturous moment occurred. No holy stroke smote his pursuers. Just breathless certainty that without immediate intervention, he was soon to die. Long moments passed. Finn could sense them, testing the air, searching for him. He felt sure that they sensed him too, and yet strong hands did not grab him by the scalp and yank him bodily from the Somme, dragging him screaming onto the shore where they would pour boiling water over him and flay his skin from his bones while he lived, breathed, and screamed. An act they desperately desired to do. An eon passed. They did not find him. Their presence faded away. It seemed Finbar's live leathering at their hands would have to wait for at least a short while. He lay in the muddy water, shivering for 20 long minutes after the last sounds of the predators had gone. When a lonely cloud sailed gently over the moon, casting the earth back into darkness, Finn filled his lungs and pushed off for the far shore. It took effort not to go too fast and make a splashing racket. He did a steady, calm breaststroke almost the entire way, racing against the cloud's passage. He reached the far side just as the moon teased its way out from behind its covering and re-illuminated the river's course. Finn pulled his soaked body out of the river, stood, and ran for a thicket that led into thick woods before the moon's light could find him. He took one step into the trees and pulled up short, a shock of cold terror yanking him to a stop. 3 British cavalrymen a horseback were waiting. The big chargers stood calmly in the dark, held strictly in check by their riders. The steel of bared sabres glinted dully in each man's gloved hand. Finbar took a faltering step back, hands half raised in terror and surrender. "Oh my Christ!" croaked and petered out of him. The major at their head spoke softly. "It's all right, lad. You're among friends. Best to keep quiet, though. Plenty of unfriendly things about just now." He extended a hand. "Major Danforth, Royal Hussars Cavalry. Climb on up. If we need to make a run, you would best not be on foot." Finn had never been glad to see an Englishman in his entire life. The past day and night had changed everything. He took the major's hand, put a foot in a proffered stirrup, and swung up behind him onto the charger's hindquarters. "Hold tight, lad." Major Danforth gave his mount a gentle kick and turned from the river. He led the trio into the woods at a quiet walk, bared sabre at the ready. Finbar clung on for dear life.